Hey everyone, Mrhappy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mrhappy, aka Mrhappy Mondays, a weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. Bit of a heads up, going to be taking a little mini vacation this coming weekend, Friday and Saturday, August 16th and 17th. Going to be in Vegas, just spend a little bit of time with the girlfriend and some of our friends as well. So if there's not a video release those days, don't worry. It's not like I have video releases consistently every day anyway, but just giving you a little bit of heads up, especially if you're someone who also tunes into the Twitch channel. On top of that, speaking of video releases, got my Savage guides out, E1, 2, 3, and 4. Could still use a little bit of tweaking. I'm going to use the documents that those come with to add charts and updated things that people can use as additional resources, and hopefully that helps cover the kind of datedness of doing the video guides, because, you know, when something new comes out, it's not very easy to update those video guides, so using the text stuff that comes with them is the next best thing that I can realistically do. Before we get into the actual questions, patron shout out. We do have a new elite patron, Mini Flame. Thank you for joining our patrons. And of course, the list that you guys have been enjoying so far. And of course, our patrons of darkness, Khuja Cross on Jenova and Kurenai, who have both been awesome supporters, massive supporters over on Patreon. So thank you so much to both of them. And thank you to all of our patrons and everyone who tunes in for Mondays with Mrhappy every week. Now with that, now that we've gotten these intros a little bit shortened, I'm sure there are a bunch of questions, so let's get started. Question number 1, hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hello, Haps. Congrats on your Savage Clear and hope you're having a good day. I'm having a good one. I'm a little tired, but I've been tired all week, so what's that? What doesn't make today any better or worse? So my question is, can you explain what's considered to be too much or too little of substats, like skill speed, determination, tenacity? Anything above 0 is too much tenacity. Also, why is critical hit more favored than direct hit for tanks now? Because my dark feels weaker without direct hit. Thanks as always, and hope you continue to have good days. So I'm not someone who does substat calculations directly. You usually get information like that from the Discord that's titled The Balance, like the Astrologian card. So you definitely want to give a Google search over to that. There's usually some better explanations of that over on that resource. I will say this, though, that it largely depends on things like skill speed break tiers, linearly scaling versus exponentially scaling stats like determination, direct hit, or linearly scaling, whereas critical hit is an exponentially scaling substat, which actually helps answer the second part of the question: why is critical hit more favored than direct hit on tanks now? The big reason is that once you reach a certain amount of critical hit, you hit a breaking point where its exponential scaling is better than the linear scaling of that of direct hit and determination, which are usually stronger stats earlier on in the expansion. That's because critical hit as a stat increases the critical hit rate and your critical hit damage, so the more you get, the value goes up more and more and more. So having over 3,000 critical hit rate effectively meets that breaking point where it starts to be better than the linearly scaling stats. If you have less than 3,000 critical hit because of gear, because of you just don't have the melds in yet, then direct hit would still be favored. But on top of that, another reason why tanks have generally moved into critical hit is for omni-tanking purposes. Now, while critical hit becomes better at over 3,000, the big thing is that one of the 4 tanks, Warrior, gets a much lower value out of direct hit because they're guaranteed to direct hit so often. That removes a lot of value from the stat because direct hit only increases the rate at which you critical hit, not the amount of damage that direct hit is going to deal. I think I said critical hit there by accident. My apologies. So that's the main reason why critical hit is an exponentially scaling stat and hits a breakpoint at 3,000 becomes stronger than the other stats, and it's also more omni-tank friendly since Warrior doesn't get as much value out of direct hit. On to the next one. Hey, Haps. Hello. I was watching one of the recent State of the Realm episodes where you mentioned that you 9th manned in the past. Just out of curiosity, could you explain what goes into being a 9th man, the responsibility, or just any other info you might have for someone doing a 9th man role? So for someone who didn't see State of the Realm, 9th man is referred to in Final Fantasy XIV. It's 8 players to your standard Savage or Ultimate raid. A 9th man is someone who will watch the 8 people play through something such as a live stream, whether it be private or public, and do things like strategize for them, point out mistakes, point out placements that can be adjusted. You're essentially put into a coaching and strategic role. And that's basically the explanation, the best explanation I could find to probably give you, because that's what you're doing. You're watching the fight and you're adding in an extra opinion, a second look at things, and also trying to figure out ways to improve certain things while they're focused on actually performing the mechanics. So everyone comes to an agreement how they want it to be done. That 9th man can be putting together charts. They can be putting together alternate strategies to what the group is trying at the moment. They can be keeping track of buffs and debuffs, screenshots, all sorts of things. You're just a giant, you're just in a coaching role, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. It's definitely something that's a little bit easier to do in the shorter raid tiers, but it's invaluable. Having a 9th person and having that extra perspective, so you can put more time into perfecting the gameplay as opposed to stopping and coming up with strategies between pulls, adds a much deeper dynamic to it. I don't know how many people 9-man anymore, because the raid tiers are actually cleared so quickly that the 9th man, some might say, it just comes down to execution, because the actual unraveling of the mechanics is not usually as tough as it used to be. But I can't speak for any of the groups and whether or not they use a 9th man now, but that's generally what goes into it. It can also be useful in lower than world first level groups. You know, it sounds like something that's really just for the highest level of group, but sometimes just having an outside perspective when you're just casually progressing can really be useful, as long as the 8 people are open to hearing that, you know, maybe someone needs to improve something or someone needs to swap to a new position, and are generally receptive to this coaching style that goes into it. Next one, hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hey Haps, first off, thanks for the SteelSeries discount code, which you used to purchase my Arctis Pro Wireless. Oh, you mean this Arctis Pro Wireless that you can use with dual audio channel setup and a swappable battery for 100% wireless uptime, so you never need to plug it in to charge? Well, I'm glad you used my 10% discount code Mrhappy10 and the link that's in every YouTube video that I post, as well as in my Twitch chat by typing !SteelSeries. I really appreciate that. As for the question, as a melee DPS who mostly raids through the party finder, when do you consider an appropriate time to practice pushing uptime? I find that during learning parties, I almost said Leviathan parties, you get mechanics over DPS lecture, because the healers don't want the extra hassle while learning mechanics. Clear parties, it's the same thing, because now everyone wants to get the clear. Then in farm parties, you now expect to have the fight down pat, so there's no practicing to be had. I think there's a confusion here, because uptime shouldn't affect the healers in so much of a sense, unless you are messing up, which, you know, I totally understand healers who aren't used to playing with specific players or are mostly just trying to get through to a nice, clean, clear. I can understand them not wanting you to take those risks, especially if you are someone who doesn't have it down. You know, obviously you can't really practice that because they want you to do it properly. I get what you're saying. It doesn't seem like there's ever an appropriate time. You kind of just have to do it. You can't just not practice the uptime, because it's part of your job to get that boss dead. It's a matter of doing it while being responsible with the mechanics. You know, if you look at a situation and go, I have no idea what to do in this exact moment, and you don't have a solution for you to try at the moment, that's when you know, okay, well then obviously I'm going to back off because I don't have the answer. But then when you see the situation, you go, oh, if I squeeze through those two AoEs right there, I could keep hitting the boss and it wouldn't cost anyone anything. Once you've seen that, once you've practiced it, then you start recognizing those situations more and more. I don't think there's ever a point where you don't want to practice uptime. I will say that specifically in Voidwalker, which is what I'm assuming this question is kind of drawn from, because that's the big hurdle for a lot of people right now. Because failing a mechanic in Voidwalker means minus 50% damage for 30 seconds, the whole mechanics over DPS thing kind of holds a little bit more clout in that specific encounter, because you either die and you're weakened for 2 minutes, or you do 50% damage for 30 seconds less if you screw something up. So it's a big loss. So not being super greedy there is definitely beneficial, but you should be able to recognize after a certain period of time what is actually a risk and what isn't. And if you don't have the answer, that's when you back off. So practice it every single pull, but practice it intelligently. Don't go in with the sheer idea, well, I'm deliberately reckless here because I want to get uptime. It's calculated and calm, and you're going in with a plan. Next one, hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hey, Mr. Happy, how's it hanging? You know, again, I think I've mentioned it in previous episodes. I don't know how that hashtag began, but I definitely enjoy it. I think someone just did it, and then like every week, like more and more people are doing it to signal a question. You don't have to do it. I still check to see if it's a question, but it certainly helps identify things that are questions versus just comments. Quick question, I'm a bit out of the loop. Whatever happened to veteran rewards? I could have sworn you mentioned something in a video eons ago about them switching over from cosmetic items to smaller things like Aetheryte tickets. Am I misremembering? Yes, but let me finish the question. Did they decide to do away with them altogether? I personally enjoyed them. It was nice to get a little thank you gift for being sub for so long. The cosmetics were both a bragging right, but also something something anyone could get after they put in the same time. How do you feel about them? So, veteran rewards were completely done away with, other than I think 4 tiers of veteran reward, I think up to the 1 year mark. The main reason being is that it was pretty intensive for them to keep creating something for longer and longer periods of time. Where if you had a veteran reward that required someone to be playing for 5 years and they started playing now, it's an item they wouldn't see for 5 years. It's not just about putting the time in, it was that it's an item that they wouldn't see till the game was at a 10-year mark. And then whatever item was developed for the 10-year mark, they'd be behind. So it was effectively just, you can't reach it. It's like an unreachable goal. So they moved away from just adding more and more veteran rewards and instead replaced them with achievement certificates, which is probably what you're mistaking for Aetheryte tickets, which were, I think, like a 3-month reward or like a 6-month reward. Actually, I think they still are right now. I don't remember where the 50 Aetheryte tickets are in the veteran rewards, if they're even still there. I just don't know. But now when you get achievements, you earn achievement certificates, and you can actually purchase items with achievement certificates. Now, the only concern with that system, which I actually love the idea of getting achievements and using those to purchase these items that have been moved from System A to System B, is that there's not enough items to buy. So anyone who was around when that system made the change over and has a bunch of achievements set aside, effectively, it feels like we have a bottomless supply. New achievements come out, we get more certificates, and then we're like, we have hundreds and hundreds of spare certificates, and it's no sign of us ever kind of needing to look at our supplies and go, oh, I'll actually ever run out of these. So that's the concern I have with the current system. But I agree with their shift away from just adding rewards for more and more time, because it's just not an exciting thing for anyone who wasn't around from the very, very beginning. All right, on to the next one. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. I feel like I needed like a different thing ever since, like, I don't know. Moving on. Hello, Happy. First time asker, so have a bonus of your very own real life Pepega mask. I would love that. Please. Please. I remember hearing a while back that Eden Savage would be similar to Creator Savage in terms of difficulty. Having now cleared, how accurate would you say that statement is? Do you think there was anything else you'd like to see from Savage or from Eden in general as a Final Fantasy VIII theme raid? Question from Zakor Shamavakor from Balmung. There you go. See, I figured it out. So, is Eden Savage near Creator Savage in terms of difficulty? I would say a very, very hard yes. They nailed the difficulty of Eden Savage this tier, I personally feel. So, fight by fight, Eden Prime is definitely on the higher echelon of first tier Savage fights. And I'm specifically looking at Creator difficulty, so leaving out Gordius and Midas. If I were to include Midas in particular, then that's my favorite first boss of any Savage raid tier we've ever had, including Second Coeurl Savage, which is a whole different beast that we can't even really consider when it comes to comparing to our current raid landscape. As for so Eden Prime, I put him on about Chaos's level. He has sort of a Stormblood level issue. Stormblood has this issue where the second half of the fight replicates the first half of the fight. So it means that by the time you get to about the 50% mark, you feel like you've progressed a vast majority of the encounter, and you're just doing it in like a remixed way going into the end. And Eden Prime kind of functions like that, which makes it a familiar place for people who did some raiding in Stormblood coming into the next one, while also establishing new trends for the way that the boss actually wants to work by still introducing brand new things to you in the second half of the encounter. So it doesn't have the chaos problem of the entire fight being mapped out by the time you hit 50%, but it also doesn't do anything to break the mold from previous first tier fights. So it's kind of like the perfect encapsulation of the old and the new. Going into Voidwalker, I love when the second fight is actually something that tests personal responsibility a lot, and Voidwalker nails that for me. It's very reminiscent of Midgardsormr from Alphascape. So again, the first two bosses here, which are more supposed to be Deltascape level, being more comparable to Alphascape, kind of shows what their content designers have actually kind of learned in recent years. I'm very impressed by that. Voidwalker, as much as people talk about him being the wall, the difficulty check, personal responsibility is a big thing in raiding, and it's something that isn't tested much in Final Fantasy XIV. So the good news is when you do get past E2 Savage, personal responsibility in E2 Savage mostly just punishes you. You're the one who dies. You're the one who causes the group to lose DPS. You get hit by a Zubat. You cause a punishing ray to hit everyone else. It may not guaranteed kill them, but you're certainly being a setback by not fixing your own personal responsibilities. Then you take that skill into the next fight, Leviathan, where it's very team oriented, where if someone makes an individual mistake, they're probably taking the whole crew down with them immediately. So because of that, teaching that personal responsibility in Voidwalker, I feel, is essential to proving somebody is ready to do E3 and E4, which I think Voidwalker nails. And then Leviathan is, again, the perfect encapsulation of personal responsibility leading to team results. Leviathan as an encounter, I was very impressed with what they did from normal mode. I didn't know what they would do for the most part, but they had some creative ideas. They reworked some old raid ideas, especially going back to 011, which was the third encounter of the final Omega tier. And overall, it makes for a very satisfying fight, one that's fun to optimize on, one that has a good variance in strategy, and one that, again, comes down to total teamwork. And then you come down to the final fight, which is a bit of a mixed bag for some people. I find that Titan is very close in functionality to X-Death and Neo X-Death going all the way back. It's one approximately 13 to 13 and a half minute encounter, which in itself cannot be underestimated. Really long encounters like that, even when the later phases aren't necessarily mechanically intense, in the case of Titan, it wears on you when you've been trying to focus and perform at that level for over 10 minutes. You know, that's where most people's breaking points start to be on a single pull of an encounter. So the fact that it kind of recognizes that, it also recognizes that the that Shadowbringers is new. There's a lot of new people coming into it, and it kind of tests you right up front. They basically make phase 1 of Titan the level of like a door boss, where it's very rapid fire, it's very intense, and then the next 8 to 9 minutes, which is the Titan Maximum and the Orogenesis phases, it makes those a lot more structured, you know, more paced like an average encounter. So it's like they still cram 2 completely separate encounters across the first 3.5 to 4 minutes of the fight, and then the last 8 to 9 minutes of the fight. And it works together in a really harmonizing way. Some people are going to dislike Titan because the fight kind of gets mechanically easier as time goes on. First phase, very intense. Second phase, okay, but not like crazy. And then the last phase, they throw a lot of mechanics aside in exchange for a lot of damage, as well as, you know, getting that final DPS check out of the way. But it's a nice kind of spread of different checks, you know, healing and mitigation checks, placement checks, DPS checks towards the end. The whole fight's a DPS check, obviously, like all raids are. The middle one, you know, taking what certain things you established from the first phase, throwing you some new stuff, and mixing the way that you actually have to approach it with differing elevations, destroyed arenas, working with less space than you might normally have, and also giving you very finely defined spaces with which to do mechanics, which are established in the first phase. So I think they nailed Eden Savage's first tier. I think it's a tier that I won't mind farming week by week. There's different ways for me to look at each fight and go, how can I make myself better in each individual encounter? And it's a different experience for how I plan to improve in every single fight. So hopefully it's a raid tier that other people enjoy. I, again, think they nailed it. I'd put it on Alphascape. I'd say overall it's the most well-balanced tier that we've had since Creator. But I'm not going to get into cherry picking which creator fight or which creator difficulty fight I'd rank in each of the 4 encounters. In fact, I think I've answered that before on the show. All right, next question. Hello, Mr. Happy. It's been a while since my last question. Well, welcome back. I am playing Paladin and having difficulty beating the E1 Savage dummy. I've been checking guides and I got 3 questions that are not necessarily exclusive to Paladin. Okay, that makes it easier because I'm not, you know, despite the solo videos, I'm nowhere near being a Paladin expert. 1. How should I time my global cooldown skills? Currently, I press the button repeatedly until the skill goes up, and I'm wondering if that process is my losing time. No, so what you're doing is actually what you'll see a lot of high-end endgame players do. A lot of people ask me, why are you smashing the button? Press it once, it works. The main reason being is by rapidly pressing the button, we're trying to eliminate any and all latency between the client side press of the button to the server side, the server receiving my input. So by trying to trigger that spell queue at the earliest point possible and making sure there's no chance the server doesn't get my message, that's why we tend to rapidly spam skills. For some of us, it's also because we've played World of Warcraft, which has a much faster input requirement. So there's no point in just doing 1, 1, 1, 1 when you could just do that and then like move where your hand actually is. So that's the main reason why. And if you're doing it, then you're not doing anything wrong. Your spell queue. I will say this though, that by doing that, if you make a wrong input, you can spell queue the wrong thing, and it can screw you out of being able to make a last second decision with your global cooldowns. There is of course a negative to this, but for those who are very sure of their inputs, this doesn't become much of a problem. 2, for double weaving, what is the maximum latency allowed? So this largely depends on the jobs and your skill speed. Sometimes it also depends on the actions that you're trying to actually take in between your global cooldowns. Certain things like popping a tincture of main stat can make a very big difference when it comes to that, because those have a slightly longer delay than everything else. Certain skills feel like they have have less delays. I personally feel that Gauss Round and Ricochet have a slightly lower delay than some of the other skills in terms of when they're actually able to be activated after Heat Blast and how quickly Heat Blast becomes available, but it still leads to some ping issues when it comes to Machinist. I'd say that if you're over 200 latency, that's when it really gets sketch if you're a job without any sort of skill speed, but you should still be able to fit it. If you're any job that has like a natural haste built in and you're around like 150 ping, even sometimes less than that, then it can cause problems there. But as a paladin, you should be able to comfortably do it as long as you're within, 200 ping. It still could happen. It still could be problematic, but that's like the upper limit of what might be possible. And 3, I wanted to ask between using What the Fast or Exit Lag, but since you're in California, you're most likely not using any. So I've tried a lot of them over the years because I have played on the JP data center as well, especially just a few months ago. What the Fast works for me 50-50. I'd say when it does work for me, it works better than most, but a lot of the times I run into connection issues with What the Fast. Exit Lag I haven't tried. Battle Ping I'd say has less of an effect on my 14 gameplay, but regularly doesn't crap out or break. Of course, I'm talking about the non-free versions of these. I'm talking about the paid versions. I have not tried, what's the one called? Mudfish, I think? Something like that. I've heard really good things about that, and it's also a really cheap paid option because you only pay for how much you use it, and the rate is, from what I understand, very, very forgivable. And I'm trying to think, there's one other one I've tried, but I don't remember what it's called. I'm sure a bunch of people in the comment section could give you recommendations based on region, because also not knowing if you're on the East Coast, if you're in another country or something like that, a lot of those things can play into which ones are actually better for you as well. So unfortunately, that's all the advice I have is very limited, but that's all the scope that I have, and hopefully I at least helped with some of these questions, maybe. All right, next one. Hey, Happy, long time watcher, second time asker. I had a question about Monk and Fist of Wind. I've been playing Monk at 80 and I use Fist of Fire. But a lot of people are telling me to only use Fist of Wind for my 4th Grease Lightning stack. So I wanted to know which does more damage when running a dungeon using Fist of Fire or Fist of Wind. So the answer is actually both. You're not exclusively using Fist of Wind until you can get to that 4th Grease Lightning stack. So the easiest way to calculate this out, the amount of total damage increase you're receiving from Fist of Fire and 3 stacks or Fist of Wind and 4 stacks is effectively the same. You're receiving 10% damage from each Grease Lightning stack, and Fist of Fire gives you 10%. So when you're at 3 stacks, that's 30%. Fist of Fire is another 10%. Though keep in mind the way that actually ends up working, the way that the game calculates it doesn't. I think it doesn't actually make it 40%. I think that there's a calculation difference because it's coming from 2 different sources. But the general gist of the thing is that they should be about equal. The big difference is that the 4th stack of Grease Lightning gives you 5% additional haste, and that speed goes a long way to the power. So I haven't played Monk at 80, so someone feel free to correct me in the comment section. But from what I understand, and this is how I would have projected it before actually seeing Shadowbringers come out, is to stay in Fist of Fire for stacks 1, 2, and 3. Between earning your 3rd and 4th stack, switch to Fist of Wind so you can earn the 4th stack. And that way you have the 10% damage for Fist of Fire while you're building the stacks, and then you're sitting at the 40% plus all the haste that you're going to be getting from the 4th stack once you actually are able to access that 4th stack. All right, next one. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. I think I'm going to go get some water after this one. Oh, no, I have some water right here. What do you know? Hashtag professionalism. I got to cut my nails. Jesus. Hey, Hap, how you doing? First time asker, so I have a bonus of 60 tomes of Phantasmagoria. I'm already capped for the week, but thank you. I'll save those for next week. My question is about Savage Prog. I've just joined my first static and progress is slow. I keep seeing all these people I follow getting day 1 or week 1 clears, and we're still progressing E1. It's a little disheartening. My question is there a trick to figuring out how mechanics that everyone else seems to be figuring out so quickly? DPS and uptime are something I know how to work on, but I don't know how to get better at working out mechanics. I've actually been considering making a video about recognizing things like this. I talk about it sometimes in things like State of the Realm and Mondays with Mr. Happy, but it is something that a lot of new players wonder, how does somebody see something? I go, well, clearly that does that, and we need to do something different. For context, we're blind progging, no guides, no hints, no nothing, so we can only raid 2 days a week, 3 hours a day. I'd say that, so this is a very delicate answer I need to make, because obviously I didn't have the kind of prog that I wanted this tier. You know, I've done plenty of raid tiers where I stream the prog, or I do the prog completely blind from the beginning and place somewhere in like the top 10-ish in regards to world clears. That's my normal raid experience, and it's kind of raid experience I always strive to have. This was a raid tier where I sort of had it. I had at least a lot of hours going into the first day, and then the hours for the following days and the rate at which mechanics were being learned, they weren't what I was used to. So I ended up kind of in the situation where you were, where I saw everyone else was working on clears. I saw what was kind of being demanded of the fight. And I also took my own personal experience and said that, things just weren't meshing with the group I was with. I felt like maybe there were some communication issues. There were like a lot of isolated deaths on certain things where it felt like we were making no progress for hours and nobody was actually doing anything to improve it. In fact, we're getting worse over a period of time. And so I made an ultimate decision that despite these all being people who have been kind, who I enjoy spending time with, that our goals probably were misaligned. And I had to leave that, and I ended up, just to make sure I didn't fall behind on loot, going with a group of friends who had already cleared, or the majority of them had. One of them I had actually been progging with and had done fresh prog with before in Sigmascape and the Weapons Refrain. The two of us didn't have it, but the other 6 had at least been through the fight. Some of them were playing jobs they didn't play the first time, but it ultimately led to about 3 hours of us going at it and, securing a pretty safe week 1 victory. But it's not really a victory to me. And it sounds like you're kind of like suffering from similar things that I did, just on a different scale. Like you're looking at all this prog and you're going to yourself, I have aspirations that don't match the current group that I'm with. And I'm going to be honest with you, if you're thinking this about the group you're in, it sounds like you just really want, not even just faster prog. You don't just want the group you're with to be faster. Your total desire is to be someone who blind progs at a quicker rate. You sound like someone with the mentality who wants to do more hours and wants to put more effort in. And that could mean that, maybe this group is right for you, maybe in terms of time availability and funness and other factors, because raiding and winning quick is not the only factor. It can be a factor. It's a factor for me, but it doesn't have to be a factor for anyone else. The game is ultimately made to be played to have fun. So I guess the big question you need to ask yourself is, does any of what you just asked me even matter to you? Like figuring it out, getting through it more quickly. If that was really the major concern, then you know, as much as you're blind progging, people would probably go out of their way to research things that could improve, I guess, a little bit more than asking just this question. It's hard for me to phrase exactly what it is I want to say, because the question you've asked me is one that would certainly help, but I don't think it would help specifically in the scenario that you are presenting to me. So just keep all of that in mind. Being able to look at a mechanic, does it deal a ton of damage? Clearly we did something wrong. Was I close to the boss? Was I too far from the boss? Was I standing next to anybody? Was I isolated away from the group? Was it a line AoE? Was it a circle AoE? Did it give me magic vulnerability? Did it give me physical vulnerability? Did it push me back? You're basically just looking at a checklist of things that it did to you and eliminating them by trying them one at a time. There's not really much more that goes into it. So take that information, go back into your raid, and really determine through a raid night what matters the most to you. Is it clearing it faster? Is it really trying to keep up with those people that you follow, the week ones, the day ones, whatever it is? Is that really important to you? Or are you going in and having fun every night? And I think you really need to answer that, because if you're not having fun every night, that's a bigger problem than, can I tell if this is a split damage AoE or not? I know it's not really the answer to the question, but I see it, and I see a lot of myself in the question itself. So I figured I'd go a little bit more personal and in-depth with the answer. All right, next question. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hello. Hi, I'm saying hello to you because you didn't say hi to me. I love Final Fantasy XIV overall. Very balanced, great game. But since we care about the game so much, what are your biggest criticisms? What are the major things that need to improve that we should ask for? I think the story finally being pared down in 5.3, the A Realm Reborn plot, because my greatest concern is not how I can enjoy the game better, because I'm what I like to call an unsatisfiable player. It doesn't matter how much they release, what they release, I will want more. I will want it more frequently. And I recognize that about myself. And so I never want the game to be catered to my needs, because it doesn't matter what they do, it will never be enough. And that's not fair to ask for that. So I look at what new players need, and new players need the main scenario pared down. Number one biggest criticism. I am someone who firmly believes that A Realm Reborn, while it doesn't actually tell a great story, it sets a lot of foundations and world building that have been very important over the years, that we've revisited very many a time across the various expansions. But that being said, it still sucks. It still sucks to do. It doesn't change the fact there's 23 quests of doing mindless chores before you're allowed to fight Titan. And there's 61 total quests in all of Shadowbringers for the main scenario. Just think about that. That's insane. So that's number one criticism. Other than that, I mean, it's all little things. They're not like major criticisms like, could you make it so my Aetheryte tickets don't ask me every single time I teleport? So, I want to use them, but it's an extra input every time. And I'd say extra inputs in menus might be another major criticism. Confirming things, reconfirming things, retrying things. We could deal with less inputs if we just had more options to customize how many of those inputs we would get on tasks where we're going to be spamming them. So maybe those two things, but the main scenario, which they're doing it with, that is a big thing for me. Oh boy, this one's a wall of text, but I'm going to take it anyway. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hello. See, you said hello. Let's go off to a good high. Wanted to ask a question and get your honest opinion on something that's been nagging at me for a while. This game is a sea of content, all the raids, primals, that most players in the game currently haven't experienced for one reason or another. And when I say experience, I don't mean steamrolling it undersized with Echo activated. The way the game is structured now, players only care about the current tier of content, and that's it. I feel that's crazy for a number of reasons. You shouldn't look at the party finder, and the only thing you see up there is current raid tier content. My question for you is, how could they incentivize players now to go back and attempt older raids and primals done at minimum item level and no echo? What are your thoughts? Do you feel this is something you need to look into so we can breathe life into other content besides the current? Lastly, for the love of all things, disable echo when minimum item level is selected, or give the players an option to do so. It kind of plays into the last answer, where having the ability to, less menu inputs, less inputs in general. But anyway, nothing is more annoying than after every single wipe, the groups have to click that off. Players who put minimum item level are looking for a challenge, so please get rid of that. Well, tell them that. Don't tell me that. But regardless, they do incentivize old content. It's just a matter of the way at which they go about doing it. Minimum item level, the way they currently incentivize it, if it drops something like an orchestrion roll, it'll drop a lot more of them. You're not going to ever give anyone like an item level relevant means of going back and doing minimum. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to throw materia at it, and I'll just do the hunt instead. You're going to throw more tomestones at it. It's already a lot of ways to get tomestones. You're not going to take that gear and bump it to the current item level just because you're doing it minimum item level, because then it wouldn't make sense to do it minimum item level because you're only 130, which would defeat the whole purpose of having item level the way it is now, and you see where I'm going with that. So the incentivization comes through things like Wondrous Tales, roulettes, old mounts, old gear, old orchestrion rolls, all that stuff. It's all about acquiring old things. But you can never make someone go back and do old content just because you want them to do old content. Players have to have a naturally vested interest in challenging themselves and approaching this stuff. And a lot of endgame players do go back and do minimum item level stuff. Heck, I know that it's not a major thing, but before the Weapons Refrain came out, we went and did all the Realm Reborn primals, minimum item level. We did Ultima, we did Thordan, we did a bunch of Heavensward ones. And even though it was just because we did the first three, we did like Garuda for Titan, and then we did Ultima on top of that, we were like, we could do more minimum item level. Why don't we just go back and do more stuff? I'll also be the first one to admit that minimum item level in this game is too much item level. I know that sounds weird because it's set to minimum, but all the minimum item level challenges, if you really want a challenge out of those fights, you actually need to go about 10, sometimes even 20 item levels lower. Because in our current, like, Thordan being like, what, 195 minimum item level, that's way too much item level for Thordan. So, it's not just how do they incentivize that minimum item level really isn't. It's at least making it level relevant, but it's not in any way indicative of that fight at its most challenging. So they've mentioned adding new options for things in the queue. Maybe, for example, they could add like a disable echo for the instance kind of situation, or things like that, or just add some way to make it so it does not come back every time you wipe, as you've stated. But other than that, they've got the incentivization they have, but it's up to the players to want to do it. You just can't, there's nothing you can realistically do to make people want to do old content. People always want the next thing, what's vying for their attention. And unless they personally have a vested interest in going back to those things, it's just not going to happen. Next question, and I think I'll do like one or two more after this, because I've actually scrolled through a lot. I've skipped like a few like ninja and job related ones, because unfortunately I don't have much to answer for some of those. I'm just kind of waiting to see what they do with ninja overall. Let's get to this question. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hey Haps, hope you're doing well. I hope you had another good week of rating. Yeah, Xeno, Arthurs, myself, Miyu, and a few other people who I've sometimes had the privilege of rating with in the past, or some for the first time. We did we cleared together this week, and it was a good time. I had a lot of fun, a lot of trolling, a lot of laughs to be had. So it was a lot of fun. Now on to the question. There was a mentality last expansion during Raid for people to go in with jobs that carried utility to get early clears before going on to something more selfish. From what you have heard seen this expansion, is this still a thing? So it's actually been the most interesting thing this expansion to see how people value the individual slots in regards to the individual jobs, because you need a minimum of 1 tank, 1 healer, 1 melee DPS, 1 ranged physical, 1 caster. Now that's not something new. You know, this whole structuring of the party like that is been pretty standard. Most people did 2 melee, 1 ranged physical, 1 caster. So now it's just a matter of what do people want to bring for that last DPS slot, and then which jobs are most valuable. And I've seen such varying comps with people talking about viability versus execution. I mean, this week I was just mentioning that raid group, we were Dancer Ninja. Do you know how many groups would hear Dancer Ninja and go, why would you do some dumb shit like that? But it doesn't matter because all the players involved are capable and qualified to be beating the content. So I've seen a lot more validation in things like selfish DPS going in, so long as the selfish DPS is warranted. Black Mage being probably the big one on the list, where week 1, the thing about Red Mage early in Prague was always that bringing Red Mage when you still need reses to see further mechanics is when Red Mage is at its most valuable. When your goal is to get from the beginning of the fight to the end of the fight, people dying is generally something you need to avoid regardless, because you need the level of play to be very, very high. So if people are dying, the amount that's lost there really plays into the end of the fight. And so what people did is they just said, well, if we're not going to be allowed to die anyway, let's just go with some of our stronger DPS jobs and beat the fight quicker, because we already have the utility of the damage reduction coming out of this job. We have an addle on the caster, we have a feint on the melee job, so we're all bringing utility in all 3 roles to some degree at the very least. The tanks and the healers have got plenty of mitigation and healing to deal with some of the other stuff, and we have a few damage utilities here, but the raid DPS contribution overall makes it so that these more selfish jobs can actually come in and do fairly well. Now, there is still some job balancing that needs to be done, but the good news is there's no job that can't walk into the raid and win. And that's the way it's always been in 14. It's the way it is now. So it's, seeing people taking things like Black Mage into their first clears and it not being a problem is a way healthier game state to have. Yes, it's because Black Mage is a monster when played well, but that's good. We should have jobs that rely on that and the level of play that comes with it, because then when the players do it, they're free to play the thing they actually love, and that's the way it should be. So it's a thing, sort of, but not nearly as much as it has been in the past. I think level of play and overall power of the job has come a lot more into play at the beginning of this expansion than we've generally seen in the past, and I really, really enjoy it. All right, I'm going to do this question. I'm going to do one more after it. So hi, by the way. With the addition of the cross-world hunts and the amount of drama circulating it, I heard a bunch of people got mad at you because you were streaming S ranks and a spawner missed it. So you want to know what's funny about that? I remember that day because I got to tell about it. Say, hey, can you just like chill with showing up to S ranks on stream? And I was like, someone came into my chat and told my whole stream that it was there. I didn't just show up to it and everyone came. Somebody showed up to me on my stream and said, hey, S rank here. I was in the zone. Everyone who was watching me at that point already knew before I did anything. So I explained that to that person and be like, listen, once it's said in my chat, I am not responsible for anything at that point. I sometimes try to slow down, but that was a case where it's like, well, they already just posted it to everyone, so I'm just going to go to it. But yeah, it was pretty unfortunate. I try to be a little bit more conscious of it now, but that one exact situation was one where it was like, I can't stop someone from coming into my stream and telling everyone on my stream that it's there in the first place. That's where it really begins. Do you think they should limit hunts to homeworlds? No, I don't think they should. And I don't even like going to other worlds. Most of the time people call other world stuff. I don't really care. I'm like, it's not worth it to go all the way out there. No, I don't think so. I think it's actually made the hunt community a little bit larger. in regards to people, I guess, communicating and working together for things like, the trains with the multiple instances, as long as they're going to be around. And soon we're going to be seeing, once the instances are removed, a little bit more reservedness when there's not 3 S ranks per zone for all the Shadowbringer zones, not 36 A ranks to a train. We'll probably see things kind of fall into a more reserved state, and things like this won't become an issue anymore. But I think that it's not so much that it won't be an issue anymore, it's that it won't be an issue for the time being. Because then the next expansion comes out, it's the same thing again. There's just more S ranks that are going to be available at that point. So it's actually a big question mark. I'm curious to see how it works out when the popularity of it dies down a little bit, because it always happens with the hunts. They just die down in popularity over time. And then only the most populated of servers or the most tenacious of hunt communities actually can go after them. I'm curious to see how it actually ends up working, but I don't think they'll limit hunts to homeworlds, nor do I think they really need to. All right, I'm actually going to take one more question after this one, because I scrolled through to see like what last question I wanted to take, and I saw a couple, and I'm still not going to get to answer them all because we're going to run out of time. But regardless, I'll do this one because it's a repeat question, then one more after this, and we'll call it a show. Repeat question: hello, happy or wagwan, which I'm assuming means hello. A long-time listener, first-time masker, so I have a bonus of all party members stacking on your answer for one battle. All of the battles, please. Kind of 2 questions. Do you think with the eventual coming of the PS5 and new Xbox that they will eventually add the game to Xbox? In addition, do you think they will do with the game like they did with the PS3? Eventually, they will only allow the game to be played on PS5 and remove compatibility. Would there be any reason for doing this? So, first question, will they add it to Xbox? Dude, you got to ask Microsoft. At this point, I don't think so. I don't think it's ever hitting Xbox. I just think there's no agreement that can be had between Square Enix and Xbox. Otherwise, it would have happened already. It's been 6 years. Like, is Xbox... I mean, to be fair, Xbox is finally getting... was it Xbox who's getting... those Microsoft... It was during the Microsoft conference. Was it... I can't remember if it was PC or Xbox. Phantasy Star Online. That ship is way too late to be sailing. And Microsoft's joining that. I think they're just going to do the same with 14, where, like, on the, like... in like the 15-year mark, they'll be like, yeah, sure, now we'll do it. I have no idea what's going on. I have no confidence this game ever hits Xbox. I'd be okay with it happening. I have nothing against it. I just don't believe in it anymore. As for the PS5 thing, will they do away with the PS4 and make PS5 the only one? I think the answer is yes, but not at the pace at which the PS3 was phased out, if that makes sense. So the PS4, obviously the PS5 is going to be stronger than the PS4, and there's been no confirmation of a PS5 version, so we still have to operate under the assumption that there will be a PS5 version. I don't see any universe in which it doesn't happen. That being said, I think that the game and its limitations via the PS4, as I'm looking at mine while I answer, I don't think they're going to hit that critical point as quickly as they did with PS3. PS3 led to a lot of things they had to hold back on because the console straight up couldn't handle it. There were just features the PS3 outright couldn't use. Like, they'd release a new feature, be like, this does not work on PS3. And it's crazy to think that they had to separate it like that. I don't know that there's a feature the PS4 is going to be incapable of, but there's certainly going to be a point where the power inside the PS4 does not match what newer technology on like PS5 and PC are capable of, and thus does become a limiting factor. I just think we're much further from that happening than we were with the PS3, because the PS3 version came out in 2013. And it's like, it didn't take that long for us. I think the PS4 version popped up in like 2.4, and then they phased out the PS3 in 4.0. We won't even have the PS5 for who knows how long at this point. And then we have to wait till the PS4 would be phased out. It would be so far in the future that even though I think it's an eventuality, I don't think it's a probability any time in the next many, many years. All right, and after much deliberating, I'm going to make this the last question of the video. If you didn't get your question answered, try in the comment section below. If I didn't answer it last week, try again. But just keep in mind, whenever I say types of questions that I didn't get to that week, certain job-related ones, if I mention specific jobs, just know that that's because I don't have a lot of input, so I find the answers aren't going to be very valuable. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hey, Mr. Happy, long-time viewer, first-time question. First off, how you doing? I'm doing all right. You doing all right? I'm doing all right. New bonus of one wind-up aloha. I like a real aloha. Excuse me. Why not just make it like an aloha, like just aloha? Why does it have to be wind-up? We got like wind-up hush fonts because that's not really him. But when we get like you know, the dogs and the cats, they're alive. You know, they're just... Never mind. As a longtime fan of Final Fantasy who's recently gotten to 11 thanks to both your content and absolute virtue, my question is a bit based on that. With the 20th anniversary of 11 coming up, do you think or want more content from that game making its way into 14 in the form of endgame content like the Baldesion Arsenal or even crossovers like the 15 event? I know we've gotten things like it before, which is what I was going to say, but I'd love to see them tie the lore together just to please my inner nerd. So keep in mind the lore is not going to be tied together. 11 and 14 do not exist in the same universe. They exist in the Final Fantasy multiverse, which is separated by the interdimensional rift, but even 14 is sort of implied that the interdimensional rift of Final Fantasy 14 is not the same interdimensional rift from that of the Final Fantasy franchise. So even 14 has kind of divided itself away from the rest of the franchise to some degree, and collaboration events and stuff like that are considered non-canon. The Baldesion Arsenal also, while it has some homages to Final Fantasy 11, the music, absolute virtue. I mean, it's got homages to other Final Fantasies in there as well, with Raiden, Proto-Ozma, and some of the other things that happen throughout all of Eureka. Now, I actually think that, yes, 14 will do something with 11. I think a small new collaboration event for the 20th anniversary of 11. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Dragon Quest X, assuming that the game is still going strong in Japan at that point. I wouldn't be surprised to see them throw their hat in as well. Since they have the 3 MMOs, they might as well. They've done it in the past. I'm actually more interested in what's happening this month with 11. 11 has done something very consistently for the past several years. They do a free login in May, and a free login in November, and then occasionally they sprinkle in like a few days here and there for the rest of the year. And they do that because those land on the anniversaries of the game. The game Final Fantasy XI initially released on May 2002. I think it was May 23rd, somewhere in that vicinity, like May 23rd, 2002. And then it released on PC November that same year, 2002. So they do free logins for the anniversaries of the PS2 and PC launches. Now that being said, this month, August, Final Fantasy XI currently is having a free login for people who already have pre-existing accounts with their old characters and whatnot. And they also released a new soundtrack on iTunes. And this free login period is longer than the free login periods that normally come in November and May. Why is there this random Final Fantasy XI free login with the soundtrack coming out that's covering tracks from before? What is happening? 11 has been gearing up. We know the 20th anniversary is going to have a major content update in about 2.5 years. But what's happening now? There's nothing to indicate anything special is happening, that they're just doing some sort of summer free login event that's for some reason longer than the anniversary's free login. I feel like something's winding up for 11, and people have said maybe it's the mobile version. People have said maybe there's a new expansion announcement coming. I don't think it's any of that, but something is clearly about to happen. In my opinion, it looks like something is clearly about to happen in Final Fantasy XI. If nothing comes of it and there's just a really cool free login period for people who are playing it, maybe it's because WoW Classic's coming out and they're like, here's your nostalgia. If you're nostalgic for other old games, try logging into this for the first time in however many years. I don't know, but I'm really curious to see what happens. I just don't think 14 is going to do anything more but borrow names of monsters, appearances of monsters, and music. I think that's where the end of Final Fantasy 14's sort of collaboration with 11 is really going to go. But that is the last question I'm going to take for this week. I've actually been having an issue where I think I've been over projecting my voice, which isn't too surprising. I am from New Jersey, because after I start speaking for like 40 minutes, I start to like clam up a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm going to wrap up the video here because that's starting to happen to me, and I only have a little bit of water left, so got to go take care of that. Again, if you didn't have your question answered, try asking again next week, or, you know, if it's your first time asking, try asking in the comment section. Obviously, I can't get to everything, but I do at least, I try to get to quite a few, so I'm sorry if I can't get to all of them. But anyway, thank you so much for watching Mondays with Mr. Happy, as you always do. Again, shout out to our Patreon sponsors, our Patrons of Darkness, Khuja and Kurenai. And with that, I'll see you after I get back from Vegas. So thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you next week. Until then, take care.